Good evening. Okay, so we are on night 4. We're going to finish up on Tenterhooks today. And it's Thursday. I'm excited to finish up this book. And yeah, let's just give it a go. If you hear dogs barking in the background, it's because literally my husband's outside burning things and with the dog, and my neighbors are outside too, and sometimes like our dogs bark at each other, so we're just gonna have to deal with real life. So on Tenterhooks, we're on chapter 14, and we are gonna wrap this baby up. We had talked about, where did we leave off yesterday? We came to the point where, good morning, hey Autumn! I don't know why I keep saying good morning. Maybe that's because I just talk usually in the morning. Okay, so we left off, and CW, the diary, she heard somebody in the apartment, and then the journaling stopped. So Lucy, who's reading the book, is like super confused. She's scared. What happened to this woman? So here we are. We're at chapter 14. So let's just settle in, and we will finish up this book tonight. How are you, Autumn? I love you so much. Okay. Chapter 14. 24 hours had gone by with no word from Jack. So we're back with Clara right now. Clara was beside herself. Sitting on her chair in the salon, she stared at herself in the mirror. Her throat started to close up. Her breath went shallow. Knees shaking, she stood up from the chair and grabbed onto its back for support. Her neck wavered as her body became heavy and felt smothered. Claire grabbed at her throat, grasping for air. The feeling of panic surrounded her and took over. After 5 years of battling this anxiety demon, she let it take over. Her chest felt heavier than ever before, and she inhaled through her nose, taking in as much air as she could. Gone. He's gone. She's talking about Jack. The room consumed her as she made her way to the back room, searching for her purse and praying it was not up in the apartment. Thankfully, her suitcase of a bag was on the kitchenette counter. She poured herself some water with one hand and scrambled to find her Xanax with the other. The prescription had expired long ago, but Claire always kept the bottle handy just in case. Throwing 2 pills into her mouth, she washed them down with the cold water and mustered all the strength she had to try and make her way upstairs. Lightheaded, she sat on the wood steps that led to her apartment instead and closed her eyes. Breathe. Breathe. This too shall pass. This too shall pass. Granny flashed into Claire's mind. She'd had panic attacks, and rightly so. As cryptic as Granny had been about her past, Claire was smart enough to know it had been stressful and full of abuse. But she finally found light and peace in her late 20s when she met her grandfather. Maybe it's time for a change, Claire thought. Feeling a bit better, Claire went back to her station and grabbed a pair of scissors to cut her bangs. As she trimmed, a small breeze kicked the small bits of hair into her eyes. Her eyes stung as she carefully rubbed them, trying not to smudge her eyeliner. But behind the tears of irritation, her eyes spewed forth real tears of emotion. Her phone chimed from her purse. Praying it was Jack, Claire checked her messages through watery eyes. Lucy, Claire groaned. I just do not have the energy, but I could use a friend. Please, not tonight. Tomorrow morning, Claire texted. Chapter 15. Lucy's eyes were bloodshot for the second morning in a row, and she'd spent all night worried about CW. Lucy couldn't wait to share the story with Claire and knew it would give both of them some insight on welcoming happiness into their lives. Opening her laptop, Lucy logged onto her email, praying for some kind of response from the barrage of resumes she'd sent out the night before. One name looked familiar, and as she opened the email, she realized it was from an old co-worker at the Natural History Museum of Chicago, Judith Connor. It read, I was pleasantly surprised to see your resume today and wanted to extend an invitation for you to meet with our new curator tomorrow. I know it's a little short notice, but he will be going on vacation next week and we have an opening. Lucy quickly hit reply and then stopped typing. She picked up the phone and dialed the phone number under Judith Connor's name. After 2 rings, a familiar voice answered the phone. Judy? It's Lucy Mathers. After Lucy hung up with Judith, she hustled into the bathroom to shower for her 11:30 meeting with the curator of the museum. Showering, she gazed at the ceiling and her eye caught a shadow by her hummingbird feeder outside. Probably just a wasp. They love feeders, and I've never seen a hummer at this feeder anyway. Without her glasses, Lucy couldn't see, so she tried to force her eyes to focus. The small shadow was still there. Lucy reached out of the shower and felt around for her glasses at the sink. Her lenses began to steam up as soon as she put them on her face, and Lucy climbed up onto the ledge of the shower. She wiped the fog of her glasses with her finger. Gasping, she saw the tiny bird perched on the feeder. It cocked its greenish head back and then flitted away. Lucy held her breath and couldn't move. Her feet clung to the wet tile, turning her toes bright red. She stepped down from the ledge, sat down in the hot stream of water, and cried happily, this time as she thought of her mother. This is exactly what she needed, to cry, to remember and love her parents and really mourn. Lucy had never done that when they died. She distracted herself and soldiered on. Each time she cried over the last few days, the tightness around her throat seemed to lessen, and the crushing of her chest began to lighten. It felt good to feel. CW had been a huge part of Lucy feeling again, and she desperately wanted to show the diary to Claire. She picked up her phone and shot her a message. Good news! I've got a job interview, so I'm getting ready for that. Can I swing by on my way, drop off something, and come back after? A moment later, Claire responded. Congrats on the interview. Go kick some ass. I'll be with clients, so just leave it with the girls at the desk. Chapter 16. We need a sip. Hey, Liz. Okay, chapter 16. The main entrance of the museum had not changed a bit. A historic brick building shaded by giant oak trees, Lucy walked with confidence through the door and thought about the trip she'd used to take with her parents to this place. Lucy loved to spend the afternoon in the museum halls, taking in all the exhibits. She had not set foot in the library since she quit and decided to make chaos of her new career. A new kind of conviction lived in her since she read CW's diary, and Lucy realized she had nothing to fear at this point. Ever since her parents' accident, she had been afraid to live, to really live. At the first sight of happiness, Lucy fled, always prideful, regretting her decisions later. The story of CW had shown her that a hesitance to trust, combined with a complete disregard for self, were inevitably destructive. Lucy walked into the office she'd spent 1.5 years growing to love. Judy was now the curator of the museum library. She had been very disappointed when Lucy left and begged her to reconsider. Back then, Lucy fled the happiness she had worked for and decided to follow a quick buck and a possible romance instead. Never again, Lucy thought. This one's for you, CW. Knocking on the office door, Lucy felt at ease for once. Not overly excited, but almost like she was home. Less than 30 minutes later, Lucy was appointed assistant curator of the museum library. She felt right for a change instead of flailing about and needed to prepare in her way. Waving away a cab, Lucy decided to walk to Claire's despite the heat. Her heart was bursting to tell Clara about her new job and all about CW, but she felt like she owed herself a little walk through the city to relish in her new win. Chapter 17. Claire finished up her morning client and went to the front desk to sort through the mail from yesterday. Distracted by Eben in the principal's office and the fight with Jack, she didn't have time to do her daily administrative chores. On top of the mail was an old leather book with a bright pink post-it on the top with Lucy's handwriting that said, "Read me," in big letters. Claire walked to the kitchen and brewed a fresh cup of tea and sat at her station with the diary. Chapter 18. With a newfound pep in her step, Lucy went over the last hour of her life in her head while she walked to Claire's. She'd fallen right back into a great place at the museum. She felt like she was part of something, at home. Lucy turned the corner onto Pleasant Street and pushed with all her might through the dark wooden door of Cece's salon. Huey shook his tail, happy to see her. Claire sat at the chair with her hand over her mouth, and Lucy noticed she was reading the diary. She hugged Claire from behind and said, "Amazing, isn't it?" Claire turned in the leather swiveled chair and stared at Lucy. "What's wrong?" Lucy asked, knowing Claire was also shocked by the abrupt end to the diary. "I know, right? What happened to her?" "It's Granny," Claire said. "Is Granny okay? Did she fall? Oh my God, is she sick?" Lucy asked in one breath. "No, stop talking and let me explain," Claire said. "It's Granny, Lucy." "Oh my God," Lucy said. "Did she die?" "Will you listen to me?" Claire shouted. "Sit." Lucy and Huey both sat at the same time, Lucy on the stool behind her and Huey on her foot. The handwriting seemed familiar when I opened the diary, but I dismissed it as coincidence. As I read on, the C.W., the Frenchman named Peter. Claire trailed off for a moment and stared at the picture of Granny on the wall across from her. And then she saw it. The C.W. signature. I had seen it before and just realized when you walked in. Claire took the picture of Granny off the wall and unfastened the back of the frame. As she removed the old photograph, Claire turned the faded photo around to show Lucy the handwriting that matched C.W.'s signature in the diary. "Where did you get that picture?" asked Lucy. She took the print from Claire in disbelief. "Is this Granny?" "Yes, Lucy," said Claire. "You've seen that picture 1,000 times." Lucy turned the print over, and written in C.W.'s handwriting was the caption, "Cecilia Wojcik, August 1930. "C.W., said Lucy, looking at Claire. "Granny's maiden name was Wojcik, and then Cecilia Dubois after she married my grandfather, Peter." Ah! Chapter 19. Claire, Lucy, and Eben, and Huey decided a mini road trip to Granny's house was in order, immediately. As they drove, Lucy got Claire caught up on the diary, asking questions Claire did not have answers for. They got to Granny's about an hour later and found her sitting on her front porch, sketching. "Claire, Lucy, and my Evan," she said with a bright smile. "Come here." They all hugged as a group, and Lucy felt like a little girl again in the arms of Granny. "We have something to show you, Gran," said Claire, handing her the diary. "Is this yours?" Granny put on her glasses, and her soft but wrinkled hands brought the book to her lap. As she opened the book and slowly flipped from page to page, she whispered, "Where on earth did you find this?" "In my apartment, Granny," said Lucy, "behind the bricks of my linen closet." Chapter 20. Peter hadn't been gone for more than 30 minutes, and I was in the bathtub. I heard the door open and assumed he'd forgotten something. I called out and said, "I'm in the tub." I put the diary down next to the bath and put on a beautiful silk robe that Mae had given to me. As I fastened my hair up, it was so hot back then. We didn't have air conditioning like we do today. I looked up and saw Stephen's reflection in the mirror. I thought I was hallucinating, and before I could speak, he grabbed my hair and started to drag me in the living room. Claire and Lucy gasped in unison, on edge to hear what had happened to her. I found out later he had followed me to Mae's days earlier and then saw me leave with Peter. Then he sat in the tavern across the street from Peter's apartment every day, waiting for me to leave. When I didn't, he waited until your grandfather left and came up. "How did he get in?" Lucy asked. Well, we didn't lock our doors back then like we do now, Lucy, said Granny. Who cares about how we got in? What happened? Clara scolded the both of them from stopping the story. Oh, he was tearing my hair out. It was truly awful, and my robe was coming off on the floor, and as he dragged me into the kitchen, I couldn't breathe, but I managed to ask him what he wanted. He said he wanted me and that he was coming back to get me, and I was coming back home with him. And he went on and on about how no ignorant deport was going to have me, Granny explained. Claire, can we make some tea? I've got to catch my breath. Sure, said Claire, not wanting to stop, but the look on Granny's face told her that this had tired her a bit. From the kitchen, Lucy and Claire watched Granny walk to her room and return with a small box. Did you know? Lucy asked. No, I had no idea, Claire said. I mean, I knew her life wasn't all rainbows, but I never expected this. The girls brought the tea back to the porch, and Granny smiled. What's in there? Asked Lucy. Patience, my girl, she answered. I'll get to it. Granny took a sip of scalding hot tea and closed her eyes. For a moment, almost placing herself back in that apartment, she continued. I got mad, you see, because I had vowed never to let any other man hurt me the way my father had hurt my brother, my mother, my brother, my sisters, and me. I reminded that pompous ass that I was trash. That's what his father had called me when he found out I was in his apartment that day. And then he hit me. I laughed because it was nothing compared to how hard my father had hit me. That made my father mad too, laughing at him. And it was the reason I have this scar just above my eyebrow. My father threw a nearby ashtray at me that day. Claire and Lucy sat crying, holding each other at the thought of Granny being hurt. Noticing the girls were upset, Granny patted their knees and said, Oh, don't cry, my dears. This is a happy ending. Well, Stephen didn't like it either, being laughed at, so he swung at me with all his might and gave me such a blow to the head that I passed out. Granny paused to take a sip of her tea and nibbled on a lavender shortbread cookie. I must have only been out a few minutes, because when I came to, Peter was there. He beat the shit out of Stephen. I watched from the floor, out of one eye, mind you, as my other eyelid had split open and was bleeding all over my sight. Well, Peter picked up Stephen by the shirt and threw him down the stairs of the apartment. Oh my God, said the girls in unison. Granny shook her head in agreement. I passed out again and didn't wake up until it was dark. The apartment was lit only by a lamp in the corner of the flat, and when I realized where I was, I saw Peter sitting by the open window, staring at me and smoking. Now, Clara, I know you don't like cigarettes, but everybody smoked back then. Granny reasoned, as if the knowledge of her grandfather smoking was more shocking than the fact that Granny had been beaten by some rich Chicago socialite. His knuckles were bleeding, and when I frowned at the sight of him being hurt, my cut split back open and started to bleed. Grandpa brought over a rag and held it to my head. Neither of us spoke, and I was honestly grateful for that, but surprised at the same time. At home, I was forever explaining myself and apologizing, but at that moment, what was there to say? Granny held her hand to her mouth, and her words seemed to break a little. I just sat there watching his eyes. I realized with him I wasn't embarrassed anymore. Peter's eyes were sad, not judgmental or full of pity, just sad for me. Tears welled up in her eyes, and she motioned for Lucy to get her a tissue from the kitchen counter. Claire sipped her now cold tea and sat back into the couch cushions, wondering where this woman came from and why she was just hearing this story now. Granny wiped her eyes and dabbed her nose and went on. I felt I could say nothing to him, not I'm sorry or thank you. I couldn't cry either. My brain was so numb and I just wanted to forget. So I handed Peter the tea, lay down on the couch, and went to sleep. The next day I woke up and spent most of an hour staring at nothing in particular, frozen between the realization that I had a choice of being stuck in a life that was hopeless or potential happiness with someone who wouldn't judge me. Happiness had never been an option, you see. I dreamt daily that my father would die so I would not feel guilty leaving Mother and the kids. She wouldn't leave him because she was scared. And it just wasn't what people did back then. You lived with it. Because next door and down the street, your friends and your sisters and even your own mother were being hit by someone. Chapter 21. Granny twisted the hem of her skirt, taking a moment to look out the window. The lavender in her garden was beautiful this time of year, and it swayed gently in the hot August breeze. Granny took a deep breath, and Claire knew she was deliberately stopping to smell the scent of lavender. You know, when I wasn't at the bottle factory at night, I cleaned one house a day to help buy food. There was no going off to school like you girls and having a career. I was lucky to just get married and have kids like my mother. Granny sipped the cold tea again and continued. I used to walk by the library every day to get to a fancy neighborhood where I cleaned, and I would always find myself wanting to skip work and hide there reading all day. But then I'd think of my mother. She needed that money, and whenever he'd have a bad day, he'd take it out on her. And that was the prison I lived in. Lucy, tucked into the corner of the couch, twirled her fingers around her red hair, listening to Granny intently. Claire grabbed for Lucy's hands, and Granny continued. The day after Peter threw Stephen out of the apartment, I asked him to go home with me. We left about noon, when I knew my father wouldn't be there. He would be most likely at a tavern somewhere. It was so hot, and with all the stress going on, I remember feeling like someone had been sitting on my chest. I felt safe with your grandfather, Clara, and that scared me. He held my hand, and I couldn't remember a time when a man's hand wasn't hitting me. We got home and found Mother and Teddy sitting on the couch in the front room. Mother waved for me to come to her, and we hugged for a long time. It's okay, she whispered to me in Polish. Everything will be okay. I looked at her and noticed she had a fresh cut peeking out from under her hair. He had come back, but he left again when Bill, Officer Huntley, came to help. She whispered in my ear, wondering if Peter was a police officer. I whispered back that he was a friend. The little ones hugged me and asked me where I'd been. I lied and said I got lost in the city, but my friend had managed to help me find my way home. The children giggled and went back to their books and games, leaving Peter and me alone with Mother. Brave, brave Mother. She grabbed me and she held me. It wasn't her bruised face that always brought me to tears, it was her smell. My mother always smelled of lavender. In the kitchen sat Bill Huntley drinking coffee. I remember his large frame looking silly sitting in the small chair. He had stayed in the house the last few nights, said Mother, waiting for Father to return, but he didn't come home. Mother laughed and said she thought he was on a rather lengthy binge at a few taverns and would eventually find his way back. I sat there and looked at Mother, realizing I could be looking at myself in just 10 years, and Peter would be my Bill Huntley. Maybe Mother was too stubborn back then, just like me, choosing the prospect of money and stability instead of choosing the gentle man sitting next to her. I knew my father had money at some point, but gambled it all away when they were young, leaving them basically destitute. This was not the life I wanted for myself, and I knew I'd be damned if I let my mother rot in it. Bill was off duty and chose to stay with Mother until Father came home, which made me feel relieved. But he couldn't stay forever and had to be back at work again the next day. Peter offered to find Father, and since Officer Huntley was willing to stay with Mother, I went with him. We started with the taverns, as Father loved his booze more than he loved anything else, and we walked. Peter told me Bill Huntley had confided in him about something. Apparently, he had asked Mother many times over the years to leave Father and live with him. Officer Huntley said he would take the children, too. I couldn't imagine why she wouldn't leave Father and just go. Peter said he had always wondered where I got my prideful and stubborn streak from, and now he knew. Mother wouldn't leave Father because she said she made a vow to him, and unlike him, she honored her promises. Mother was always telling us to keep our promises. Never lie, she said. Remember, your character is all you have. I must admit, as much as I desperately love my mother, I was still furious with her. She had a chance to leave and to get the little kids out of that house, but she didn't. She was being a martyr and taking her children down with her. We searched for 3 hours and came up with nothing. I secretly prayed that he left town or hopefully was dead in a gutter somewhere. Your grandfather walked me back home after we searched all afternoon for him. I needed to stay with Mother and help her with the younger kids. My aunt was there when we got back. She made sure to give me a guilt trip before she left and pinched my arm as she told me I was selfish for leaving my mother. Did Grandpa stay? Clara asked, loving every minute of the story but itching to hear the end. I asked him to stay for dinner and he said he had to get back to work. I was disappointed to see him go and thought I would never see him again. It was strange to have Officer Huntley at the dinner table with us that night, and I was surprised when he helped the women with the dishes. Men never did that. I spoke to Mother in Polish so Bill wouldn't understand, and I asked her why he was staying. And she finally said what I had been assuming for so long. He's my friend. He was so much more than that, though. I watched his eyes while she washed the dishes and he dried. He looked at her with the same pain and sadness that your grandfather had looked at me back then. Officer Huntley left to patrol the neighborhood, and I was sure he was on the lookout for Father. Mother spoke softly to him before he left, and the sight of the two of them was almost circus-like as he towered over her. I heard her say, "Be careful," confirming my hunch that he was going to look for Father. It had been 3 days with no news, and at dinner, Officer Huntley mentioned he wanted to talk to some of the men on the street to see if they had seen him. Just after Officer Huntley left, I told Mother I was feeling ill and wanted to lie down, which was partly true. I climbed the back steps to the attic space I shared with Mary. It was brutally hot up there, even with the fan blowing directly onto the mattress we shared. The boys usually brought our mattress down on the porch on really hot nights, but only after Father had come home, so he wouldn't start anything. But I didn't go to sleep. I pried open the small window that led out to the thick trellis behind the house. I had to find him. That sick bastard was going to spring out at any moment and either kill me or Mother, and I had to stop him. Stephen had once mentioned at a tavern I'd never heard of on Ashland and Division where he used to go to shoot craps. In the ghetto, he said. If only he had actually seen a ghetto, he would think that my neighborhood was rich. Granny laughed. The walk wasn't too far from my house. Nobody would be checking on me in the attic, so I climbed down the trellis and avoided being seen in the streetlights. I found that tavern and sat there for an hour or so, willing him to come out drunk so I could stab him with the knife I'd stuck out of the kitchen while drying dishes. It sounds terrible in the coward's way out, but he was a monster. He tormented all of us for years and years, beating us and belittling us. I waited and waited, and finally he came out. I followed him 2 blocks from the tavern to the apartment. He walked in and didn't come out. I waited a little bit more and walked back home, hoping Bill was there so I could tell him where I saw Father. He wasn't there, and knowing Father, he had passed out in the apartment and wouldn't be awake until morning. It was just before midnight when I crawled into bed next to Mother. I couldn't bear the hot attic and wanted to be next to her. I looked at the smaller kids on the floor, sweating in their sleep. I held Mother's hand and closed my eyes. Granny took a moment to drink her tea as her voice cracked with dryness from talking so long. The girls sat in silence, sipping their own beverages, and Huey got up to circle around and make his spot cozy again on the hardwood floor. Evan pulled a plastic bag of tiny animals and dinosaurs from the window seat and thoughtfully lined them up on the floor. I woke up to the sound of a gunshot. The children screamed and I fell to the floor, bundling up in their sheet and dragging them to the closet. Laura cried, "Don't leave us!" I told her I would never leave her again and hurried back to the bed to get Mother. I told her to stay with the kids in the closet, and thankfully she agreed. She was scared too. I could see it in her eyes. Another shot came from the back of the house, and as I raced to the back door, I grabbed the baseball bat against the wall that Tom had left when he came in for dinner. Through the screen, I could see the shape of a man, and as I opened the back screen door with my foot, I hit him in the head with all my might. I instantly realized the man was your grandfather when I saw Father lying on the ground, his chest full of blood. Officer Huntley was standing on his limp hand, which held a gun. To the right of the house, Teddy staggered from the bushes, and I screamed, confused, thinking it could still be Father coming to kill us. Peter and I ran to Teddy, who fell to the ground. He looked at me and smiled. You're safe now. That bastard's dead. Chapter 22. Kind of makes you rethink life after hearing a story like that, Lucy said as she washed the teacups and Claire dried them. Eben sat on the porch with Granny and Huey, talking about something that made them both laugh. I'm an idiot, Lucy, Claire said as she watched Eben. Jack has been happiness for me, and I'm just scared. But scared of what? This woman. Claire pointed at her grandmother. Granny, she's been through hell, and I'm whimpering about my life? The two of us have been real whiners lately, Claire went on. I got a job at the museum, Lucy said with a proud smile on her face. Claire smiled and hugged Lucy. Chapter 23. Granny insisted Claire and Lucy stay the night at her house, and she would make fresh gwumpki for dinner, and for dessert, daled babka and rusziki. Polish dishes were a staple in Claire's house growing up, and she missed this comforting connection with her grandmother. How's the salon, Claire? Granny asked as they cooked. It's really, really good, Granny, said Claire, finally making money. Lucy scoffed. She's BSing you, Gran. Clara's making so much money she's opening up more salons, one in New York and one in San Francisco. Granny looked up from rolling her cabbage and nodded her head at Claire. Excellent, honey. I'm so proud of you. Claire stuck out her tongue at Lucy and thanked Granny for her encouragement. Lucy didn't even know that there was talk of opening a salon in Paris, too. Claire set the table and scolded herself for thinking she could have done any of this without Jack's support. His creativity, his belief in her out-of-the-ordinary concept, she honestly couldn't have asked for a better business partner or friend. Eben broke the silence with a gasp as Granny tasted a little of the raw meat to make sure it was seasoned properly. She winked at her only grandson and rolled the last gwumpki. You know, there's not only a little bit of my history in Lucy's apartment, but a good amount in your shop and your flat, Claire. I know, Granny, it was the garment factory, Claire trailed off as her eyes met Lucy's. Mae's shop, the girl said in unison. Granny nodded her head and slipped the cabbage rolls into the oven. Sit down, girls, while this warms up, and let me go get something from my room. Come with me, Eben. Lucy shook her head in disbelief. Eben returned first with a medium-sized cardboard box with Granny just steps behind. She had in her arms clothing, none of which Claire had ever seen before. Mae made these. Aren't they beautiful? Granny said, handing the first item to Lucy to spread out onto the kitchen table. A silk and velvet kimono-style robe, which still had some vibrant streaks of the coral color from the day it was made, but it was just as beautiful. Black and gray beadwork revealed a scrollwork of vines cascading like hair down the back of the robe. Oh, Granny, this is gorgeous, said Lucy carefully, stroking the silk and running her fingers over the still taut beadwork. Claire nodded in agreement and took the next garment Granny had handed her. A sheer baby blue chiffon blouse, again with intricate beading, but this time embroidery. That one would look nice on you, Claire, with your black hair, said Granny. So what happened to Mae? She continued to design and sew, and then after Peter and I were married in 1935, she took a much-needed holiday back to Paris. There she met a man named Christian who reignited her passion for design, and she returned to Chicago with more creativity and ideas than ever. I'd never seen a woman so dedicated to her work, Granny said, looking at her granddaughter. You always remind me of her, Claire. Clara got up and put a blanket over Eben, who had quickly fallen asleep as they were all talking. The last few hours had revealed a story so close to her that she couldn't help but rethink the way she had treated Jack. She and Granny were so alike, and so stubborn. Lucy and Granny continued to talk about Mae and her business and all the clothes in the attic. Claire sat silently, staring at a sleeping Eben, guilt washing over her for being so selfish and ungrateful to the one person who had given her support. You know, Mae had died in 1965, Granny told Lucy, in a horrible string of tornadoes. I remember it was Palm Sunday and Mae was over for the holiday. We had the best ham that year. Granny stopped talking suddenly, and Clara looked at her, wondering what was wrong. Lucy, too, was staring in silence along with Granny, both looking just above Clara's head. What's wrong? Clara asked, checking her head for something sticking out of it. Claire, a familiar voice said from behind her. Jack stood in the doorway, a half-hearted smile on his face, directly mostly at Granny. Clara stood up and took him by the hand, leading him to the living room sofa. Before you say anything, Claire said as Huey tried to get into Jack's lap, I want to say I'm sorry. Jack gently pushed Huey off the couch and looked at Claire. His prepared speech about quitting the salon and leaving for good started to dissolve the second they met eyes. Clara, I'm here because I was going to tell you I have to leave, Jack said. I can't live every day knowing I'm not going to be with you until we're old. Jack took her by the hand. And I can't watch Eben grow up and not be with him every second of the day. I'm not going to beg you, and there's nothing more I can do to convince you that I am completely dedicated to you and Eben. Clara started to cry, knowing she had an opportunity right here in this moment to destroy or start her life. She glanced to the porch at Granny, who seemed like a different person to her now. As she inhaled, Clara readied her heart and made her choice. Chapter 24. Lucy walked into the museum with bags full of clothing from Granny. Her first proposal was an exhibit of female clothing designers from the 1920s and 30s with Miss Mae Dubov front and center. After Clara and Jack left to talk the night before, Granny went on to tell Lucy about Mae's shop and how famous she really was in the city, but only with high society people who pretended not to notice there were people starving just blocks away. Lucy was happy to learn that Mae took bits of her profit to help a friend named Jane Addams, who was, as Granny put it, hell-bent on helping other French immigrants who were not as fortunate as she. Lucy had promised to return that weekend to spend time with Granny and get a full account of Mae's life, and she was the last of any relative or friend to recount this strong woman's history. Her phone buzzed again inside her purse, but because her hands were full, Lucy kept on walking to her new office on the top floor of the museum. Despite the fact that she had bags in each arm and was wearing heels, she stubbornly climbed the marble staircase to actually feel herself going up in the world instead of down for a change. Flowers greeted her from her coworkers, and Lucy felt the buzz of her cell phone again. Scrolling through the messages, she clicked on the one in all caps that read, Lucy, I found more of Granny's stuff in the attic of the salon. The diary she had left at Stevens, more of Mae's dress sketches. Lucy's heart raced for the new find and the restart of the life she had always wanted. No more running from myself, she thought, taking a moment to smell the fresh floral blooms in one of the vases. Nestled in between the pink dahlias, lavender sprigs, and wine-colored peonies was a card with Claire's handwriting. As Lucy pulled the paper greeting from the envelope, a necklace came out with it. A small bronzed hummingbird hung from the end of a chain, its tiny beak feeding on a flower. The note read, It is not the strength of the body that counts, but the strength of the spirit. J.R.R. Tolkien. The end. So that's it. That's the end of our story. That's the end of On Tenterhooks. Hey, Catherine. So I hope you liked that story. It was fun to write. It took a long time. But I just had a really good time writing it. I'm actually working on 3 other novellas, and the next one is called The Neighbor. It's taken me forever to finish because I keep putting it on the back burner, and it's basically me in a horror story. So that'll be a great one. My daughter's holding the book over my head. So I hope you enjoyed it. You know what would be awesome is if Netflix made this into a movie, but that's like a huge dream of mine. Thank you girls so much for listening. My daughters were here listening to the book too, so I'm so happy to just have them here with me. Have a wonderful night. Thank you guys so much for your support.
Help me.
And I will talk to you later. Bye.